We're now going to Ter Kriya. This is the expression of mourning and grief that we feel at the passing of a loved one, particularly an immediate relative. For a parent, we tear on the left-hand side. That is the side of the heart, to show that we have an irreparable tear in our lives. Before we do, we're going to make the bracha. If you feel comfortable doing so, repeat after me. And then I'll make a small tear, and you will tear a little bit of the rest of the way yourself. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Dayan Ha'emes. Tearing these. That's good. On the left-hand side. Tear a little bit of it yourself. Just increase them. That's good. Fine. Okay. You can be seated if you'd like. We are gathered here to pay our final respects to Rabbi Professor Shlomo Sawilowsky, Harav Shlomo Noach, Ben Alter Avram Yaakov. We will begin with 2 chapters of Tehillim to be recited by Rabbi Moshe Siegel and Rabbi Avi Hodingsfeld of Data Richardson, which has provided such a warm and welcoming and loving community for Sarah and Akiva and their family. We call upon Rabbi Siegel.
Or just I'm saying it?
No, you're repeating after me? No, you're saying it. Yeah.
Hebrew?
And English. Any one of these.
Ashrei ha'ish asher holach ba'atas b'shoyim v'derech chatoyim lo amar v'moshav leitim lo yashav. Happy is the one who has not followed the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the path of sinners, nor sat in the company of the scornful. Ki im b'soras Adonai chefzo b'soroso yega yomam v'layla. Rather, that one's delight is in the Torah of the Lord, meditating in God's Torah day and night. Will be like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in season, whose leaf will not wither, and whatever that one does prospers. Not so the wicked, who are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked shall not survive judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord Hashem loves the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked is doomed.
Call upon Rabbi Hodingsfeld.
Mizmor LeDavid Adonai Yagor Balefim Yishon Bahar Kachech Harlich Kamim Karl Tzedek Dover Emet V'Vavim Uragal Al Shono As L'Reyu Ra V'Kerpol Lo Nasa Al Kravo Nivze Be'einav Nimas Vasir Adonai Yitabed Nishma L'Hara V'Lo Yami Kaspa Lo Nasa V'Nesha Shochar Al Nafi Lo Laka Oise El Hila Lo Yod Imo D'Olam. Song of David, Lord, may sojourn in your tent, may dwell in your holy mountain. One who walks in purity, does what is righteous, and speaks the truth from the heart, who has no slander on the tongue, nor has done harm to a fellow, nor cast disgrace towards a neighbor, His eyes upon no person is repulsive, but who honors those who are in awe of the Lord, who swears truthfully, even to personal hurt, and never retracts, who does not lend money on interest, nor takes a bribe against the innocent. One who does these things shall never falter.
Which one of you speaking first? Which one of you speaking first? We'll call upon Sarah and Jack in that order to offer some words of tribute. I will conclude at the end.
Thank you to everyone who came out today here in Dallas, Texas, and to everyone who is watching online. Your attendance and condolences from all over the world mean so much. In my high school yearbook, the opening words I will now summarize have never felt more applicable. The Talmud notes that once a child reaches a point where it is possible to care for himself or herself, usually at bar or bat mitzvah age, the parental obligation to raise the child is over. Anything a parent does after that point is all considered to be tzedakah. The mitzvah to honor one's father requires children to provide food, clothing, and shelter because of the voluntary care this parent has given over the years. Consequently, we must repay the honor and respect to the parents who provide us anything additional under no heavenly obligation, but solely because they love us. And so, my father's favorite nigun he used to sing every Seder, Al achas kama v'kama, how much more so I owe my Father and God for providing everything voluntary from love. Today, rather than recounting my father's life accomplishments, I would like to share some of the most valuable lessons my father taught me. Lesson number 1, be humble. My father was brilliant, arguably the smartest person all of us have ever known. Topics of Judaism, statistics, history, and so on. He learned everything there was to know about the topic, but never announced it. Unlike the attention-seeking society we live in, my father would dodge glory. He observed and learned things quietly. Few knew of his successes and accomplishments, such as being nominated for the Nobel Prize for his work on the International Encyclopedia of Statistical Science. My father would tell me, and I quote, "Anyone can get nominated. It's really no big deal." When I asked him what he would do if he actually won, he shrugged his shoulders and replied, "I'd say, thanks the Lord." He didn't even take this accomplishment seriously. Though he could have profited heavily from his consulting work as expert witness testimony, saving state after state tens of millions of dollars each, or securing federal research grants over $13 million. I overheard conversations where my father accepted the minimum amounts of financial compensation but worked to the maximum of his abilities. He was the epitome of the phrase, Amor ma'at ve'aseh harbe, say a little and do a lot. My father was a humble man and preferred to be a wallflower. My brother Jack and I chose the final resting place for my father that speaks to the humility that he demonstrated in his academic tenure, professional career, rabbinic pursuits, and in his personal life of family, friendship, and acquaintances. This spot was specifically chosen because it is off to the side and not front and center for attention. Lesson number 2, help others when you can. My father once told me the rabbis at Pirchei Shoshanim not only gave him the prestigious title of valedictorian of his smicha receiving class, but asked if he would help others better understand the course material. I think they meant to share his notes. No. He went on to make live and recorded sessions, pre-COVID, and yes, you can find it on YouTube. My father went into deep discussions on complicated topics. And if that wasn't enough, he then wrote a book called Shabbos in the Kitchen. Far be it from my father to take any credit for his incredible ability to grasp difficult topics of Jewish laws. Rather, he took this as a personal mission to break down the material that is presented in a way that the reader can be both expert and novice and still have the same takeaway. That wasn't enough. He went a step above and beyond to explore various customs, including those that differ from his own Chabad minhagim and reported traditions within the diversity of Orthodoxy, Ashkenaz, Sephardi, Chabad, leniencies, stringencies. But his helping work went far beyond this book on Shabbat. My father made donations to so many charities, sometimes anonymously. Perhaps a favorite cause to support was Beis Chabad of Farmington Hills in Michigan. But he didn't just write a check and leave. He personally shopped for and cooked tasty foods for Shabbos Kiddush. He bought the supplies, such as paper goods and toilet paper. And for the early morning minyan, he even bought a new urn for coffee. He hated coffee. It wasn't just material supplies or financial contributions. My father woke up extra early, gave rides to the elderly congregants, and supplied much of the congregation's spiritual growth through his lectures and classes. My father went out of his way to give business to those he could in the community and held strongly the value of giving others fair opportunities others may not have. In the history of academia, in fields of mathematics and statistics, my father was ranked 4th most prolific doctoral advisor and ranked number 1 as serving as major professor on committees to the most women and minority doctoral students since the 12th century. My father instilled in me one of the greatest values of helping all others by offering academic mentorship services, career guidance, professional development planning, logic-based legal service, all free of charge, anywhere and to anyone. Lesson number 3, invest in your children's education. It's no secret that my father was a great and accomplished professor. When I was younger, I asked him why he didn't leave academia and pursue something else. He used to joke with me that he loved school so much, he just couldn't bring himself to leave. As a child, that made no sense to me. But I never thought about, should I go to college or not? It was always a given that I would A, go, and B, that my father would pay for it. There was never a burden on me to think about paying for my education, like my father had personally experienced. A few weeks ago, I sent my father the end of the semester report cards from my children's school. We followed up the next day with a Zoom call with my 6-year-old son named Eitan, a nod to my father, as the Hebrew letters can be rearranged to spell Tanya. My son spent his precious winter vacation time that morning singing davening songs with his beloved Zadie. The glowing smile my father gave me that day while sitting in the hospital feels bittersweet now. But the memory of what my father said next is so important to me and will last a lifetime. My father said, "I couldn't be happier with the school choice you made. Look at how wonderfully your children connect with Judaism and are learning Torah. I know you and Akiva are making sacrifices to send your kids to this yeshiva. But as far as I'm concerned," my father said, and I quote, "you're getting the deal of the century." My father had the honors of being Sandek to hold both of my sons at their Brit Milot. I asked him both times if he would accept this honor, not just for the day of the event of the Brit, but for a lifelong commitment to guarding their education and spiritual journey. He was specifically tasked to guide all of my children through their B'nai Mitzvot. Now my father will have to continue this commitment from Shemayim above. Lesson number 4, try to have a sense of humor, even if you're not funny. A few years ago, my father got an alert that he was the victim of identity theft. Can you imagine the chutzpah and ignorance to try to pass yourself off as Shlomo Sawilowsky? My father had to go to a bank and prove he was the real deal and not the thief. He looked deep into the eyes of the bank representative, stroked his beard, fumbled with his yarmulke, and astutely said, "Do I look like my name could be Christopher Gomez?" As a mother of 3 children, I've sent my father thousands of pictures and videos of his grandchildren over the years. Recently, I sent school pictures of my beautiful 4-year-old daughter, Audrey Patricia, named for my father's mother, Patricia Audrey. His reply was, "These are really amazing. My recollection of school photos were they were dark, dingy mugshots." I remember my father once had me proofread a form a large company had him fill out. They asked the stereotypical, "What are your strengths and weaknesses?" question. The strengths, he reported, was not what I recall. What stuck out in my mind is what he wrote to a major business organization as a stated weakness. "Sometimes my socks don't match." So today, I am not wearing matching socks to remember my father's sense of humor. Lesson number 5. I can't live your life for you. On my 18th birthday, my father sat me down and told me his father did the same for him on his 18th birthday. He sternly told me the following words, which were not just family tradition, but also spoke of his parenting style. "I can't live your life for you." Though I'm still a young parent, my father taught me there are rules of the household, but autonomy that has to be pursued. That emotional independence gave me the freedom as a child not to run from my father, but to him whenever I needed guidance. No matter the dilemma, my father would calmly explain his approach, but left the decision-making up to me. My 16-month-old son, Adam Raphael, spelled with a PH, as an homage to my father, Stephen, spelled with a PH, started walking a few months ago. Sharing developmental milestones of my children with my father was one of the strongest bonds we had. Since my childhood, my father was more than a father to me. He was my mother, my teacher, my Rav, my stats tutor, my editor, my lawyer, my cheerleader, my therapist, my role model, and my best friend. But there was no role that he cherished more than being a grandfather to my children. They are, as he always told me, his legacy. And yet, even being literally an expert in topics of self-determination, educational psychology, and the behavioral sciences, he never told me how to raise my family. On the contrary, if I asked him about it, he would say, I don't know. I just wrote a bunch of papers and a bunch of books about it. In statistics, it's all X's and Y's. You do what works best for you. I can't live your life for you. And he meant it in the most respecting and caring way. Lesson number 6. Always have hope. But everything is from God. My father confided in me many things, including the depth of his health issues. He tried to hide from others lest they feel burdened by it. Although I understood I would have to stand here at some point, I had hoped there would be more time. Towards the end of his life, my father attempted to reinforce the importance of having hope each time he recounted a doctor visit or had a medical update for me. He would say, "No doctor has told me, don't buy green bananas." One of the last conversations I had with my father ended by him and I talking, and me telling him how much I loved him and how much he meant to me and my children. In his own way, my father tried to reassure me that he knew this and he loved us. But he added, I quote, "When it will be my time is up to the Eibishter." Today, though a part of me will always feel broken, missing my father, it is through extreme pain and difficulty to have the ability to receive Hashem's will with love. Al achas kama v'kama. Thank you all.
I'd like to thank you all for coming very much, and for those of you who are attending online. I'd like to thank the rabbi for organizing this, and especially my sister for arranging a lot of the logistics. We are here to honor the memory of Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Stephen Sawilowsky. While I'm not happy to be here on this particular day,
I am happy that at least it's happening on a Thursday. My parents divorced when I was very young, and throughout the 1990s, Thursday was the day my father had custody of us. Thursdays and every other weekend, and therefore Thursday was always my favorite day as a child. I'm going to speak in two sections. The first section will be a recount of my memories of my father, how kind he was, how great of a man he was. And the second section is going to be an autobiography that he wrote. So part one. I wore a mask before speaking just now due to COVID-19. That mask was sent to me in the mail by my father. In the early months of 2020, when everyone was panicking, he somehow found an obscure website that was still selling masks and gloves, and he sent me a package in the mail of about 50 masks and 200 pairs of gloves. He really wanted to take care of me. I'm in my 30s, it didn't matter. Beneath the mask, luckily you can't see it, but I have permanent braces inside my lower front teeth. My father actually gave me braces twice. The first time, the orthodontist left, and so people came in to fill in, volunteers. 1 month it would be one orthodontist. The next month it would be a different orthodontist, and they each pulled my teeth in different directions. It didn't work out very well, and so in the end, years later, he put me through braces a second time. He's always an unbelievable provider. My first orthodontist didn't tell anyone, but he was sick, and he didn't tell his friends, his family, his coworkers. He just kept his life very private. He wanted to be normal and just keep everything normal, and just one day he was gone and shocked everyone. And my father did the same thing. Very few people knew he was sick at all. I knew he was sick, but I didn't know how bad it was. I drove here in a car that my father gave me. Before that, I drove my Bubby's car after she passed away a few years ago. He bought that car for her. He supported her financially to a great degree, as she was a widow alone in Florida. Whenever I would speak with my father, for years and years, it was so predictable, but always, every single time, one of the things he would bring up was to ask, how's the car running? And if there were any repairs needed, he would pay for it. He put me through undergraduate school at Michigan State University, followed by a master's and doctorate in education, evaluation, and research, a program he largely ran. He was not allowed to grade my work, it was against the rules, but he was there to guide me, and that was the most important thing. For school, I never paid a penny, and I never had any student debt. Despite having a successful professional career, which I have due to him, he would always look for another excuse to give me money, anything he could think of. On birthdays, on Hanukkah. Despite my sister having 3 children to care for, whenever he would help her out, he would always tell me that he now owed me money now to make it fair. He always wanted everything to be fair. And I would disagree with him and tell him, you don't owe me anything, you have given me plenty. But he would always insist. Even when my sister and I were very little, he would buy us candy. If we ever wanted to trade candy, he would insist on trading the candy 1 for 1. Some of us would value one candy more than another, but he didn't want either of us to get ripped off. He would say, make sure it was the same, equal, 1 for 1. He bought me every cell phone I ever had. Again, as an adult, no longer a teenager, I didn't need him to do this, but he wanted to, he loved to. And he would always have the exact same phone model as I did. The same case, the same screen protector, the same data plan, same everything. And I was stuck being his tech support when he couldn't figure out how to use an app. I remember making the operating system font size larger so he could read the words better. I was so happy that there was a way I could be the one helping him for a change. He never asked for much. I wish I could help him adjust the phone settings one last time. Every year he would file taxes. He would purchase multiple copies of the tax software and gave me a copy. And I know other people received copies as well. We're going to have to buy it ourselves for the first time. The list goes on and on. My father was an incredible provider and just full of love. As my sister Sarah mentioned, he would also provide for his shul. He was constantly picking up lox, bagels, coffee, cakes, disposable plates, cups, napkins, whatever was needed, along with, of course, far more sizable donations. He did whatever he could do. That was whatever he could. That was what he did. I'm told that when the news broke at the university, multiple college faculty members and professors were crying and were in shock. He was loved. One professor told me that after working with my father for over 20 years, he was confident you could choose any 3 other professors. And my father did more for the college than all 3 combined. And I think most people who knew him would easily agree. At any given time, he would have dozens of doctoral students relying on him to help them understand the field and successfully graduate. Growing up as a teenager on the weekends or in the evenings, there were constantly people over at the house, students of my father, and he would be teaching them the material and helping them write their master's theses and doctoral dissertations all the time. Eventually, I was one of his students, and I got to learn statistics. He helped me a lot, but honestly, in the field of statistics, I'm a little jealous because there are other people who spent even more time with him. I'm very jealous of them. I feel terrible for the current batch of students, doctoral students, who are in the middle of their degrees or dissertations right now. Without my father to help them, they're in a lot of trouble, and I would be too, if I was in their shoes. In the 5 years of graduate school, when I attended Wayne State University, I was constantly running into people who I often didn't even know. And one of the first things they would say to me is, "I adore your father." You see, despite how unbelievably brilliant he was also extremely approachable. He had a master's degree in counseling. And he listened when people spoke very carefully. He was always very kind. He had great stories, tons of jokes in his class and out of the class. He was extremely witty. He was truly loved by so many people. He also led multiple religious study groups daily and weekly. He had multiple circles where he would teach. People loved to hear him speak. Not only did he have the energy and the excitement and the humor, but he knew every book by heart. He would cite all the time, okay, it's page 83, the second paragraph, I think it's the third sentence. He knew it all. I actually, growing up, I had no idea that he was that smart. I knew he was smart. I didn't know that smart. He just never bragged. He never really said anything about it. He just quietly did it. He took his incredible gifts as a genius, and he would somehow make it simpler and attainable for the rest of us, if we could. Several years ago, probably about 10 years ago, I saw my father scrolling through a computer document looking for something. It was his curriculum vitae, and it was probably 50 pages long. Wow, I exclaimed. He just kind of shrugged it off like it was nothing and muttered under his breath about how he needed to update it. By now, I'm sure his CV would be well over 100 pages long, if not 150, and I am not exaggerating. One of his favorite hobbies was bird watching. He would put out a bird feeder and he would stand at the door with binoculars and he would watch them. He didn't just know quantitative methods, but also qualitative methods. I remember him describing the bird watching. How many birds would show up at a time? What time of the day is it? Which type of bird feeder do they use? Do certain birds get along with each other? Do they run away? What happens when the squirrels come? He could list 100 things in a row that he would observe about the birds. That's the kind and caring person that he was. Some other hobbies of his were collecting numismatic coins. He would play chess. He would play these really fast 1-minute games of chess. In a minute, he would just play it. He would just play again and again, and he was very highly rated. I don't know his rating. I remember as a kid, when we had dial-up internet, he would play online chess. He would get so angry at the lag because it's 1 minute. So you just click as fast as you can and the lag would make him lose. Or maybe that was his excuse for losing, I don't know. He also enjoyed amateur ham radio. And he enjoyed various TV shows, radio, or online social media channels. He followed the news a lot. He watched gold panning shows, and he loved wilderness survival. And people who would go into the woods and build a shack and hunt or whatever they would do. But he had very few desires for himself. He was unbelievably charitable and a kind and giving person. He wasn't interested in fine wine or anything fancy. He was extremely humble. Actually, he hated alcohol. He would speak of himself as a nobody, as nothing, and he gave to others everything that he possibly could. He was a great man, and he will always be remembered. And now for part 2, I'm going to read you an autobiography he wrote. He sent this to me about a month and a half ago. I didn't know how sick he was. I didn't know it was imminent. He snuck it in. He gave me this autobiography under another pretense. It was another conversation. He was very clever. But I'm glad he sent it to me, and I know why now. I'm going to read it in the first person, as these are his words. I occasionally abbreviate or truncate, trim a few things in honor, in the interest of time, as it's 20 pages long. So it will be the shortened version. I was born in Augusta, Georgia, on March 7th, 1954, which corresponds to the second day of the month of Adar II in the Jewish year 5714. My Hebrew name is Shlomo Noach, and my father's Hebrew name was Alter Avraham Yaakov ben Menachem Mendel Sawilowsky. My mother's Hebrew name was Pesha Peril Ram. Her mother's name was Esther Bogoslawski Ram from 1903 to 1993, born in Belarus, and her mother's name was Celia Siegel Ram. I know very little about my genealogy. I was born with paralysis that affected the left side of my face and left side of my body and both my feet, and had an uneven smile as a child, a residual effect from the paralysis. As the years went by, I recovered, but I required knee braces and metal supports in my shoes to walk. I was highly allergic to many foods and just about anything outside. If such a thing had existed, I would probably have been a candidate for being a bubble boy. Instead, I carried a strong antihistamine medicine with me whenever I went outside. I shed the leg braces and antihistamines at 9 years old. When my family moved to St. Petersburg, Florida in 1967, and I'm adding that he would have been around 13, the nearest shul was about 5 miles away in the bordering city of Gulfport. It was a small shtetl of about 20, and my father was younger than the members' average age by several decades. Being Orthodox, I had to walk there and back every Shabbos in the hot Florida sun while wearing a woolen tallis. I was probably the only Orthodox Jew on the west coast of Florida at the time, and he notes his parents and siblings were not as observant. With the paralysis behind me, I became more involved in sports. As a 9th grader at Tyrone Junior High School, I doubled with first place blue ribbons for the half mile and the mile at the St. Petersburg Junior High School City Track Meet in 1968. As a 10th grader in high school, I was a member of a 2-mile relay team that set a school record, earning an invitation to participate in the Collegiate Florida Invitational Relays held at the University of Florida. I lettered in track, cross country, and soccer in the 11th grade. However, track meets and soccer matches were often held on Shabbos, precluding my participation. So I decided not to pursue further competitive sports. My other hobbies were numismatics and chess. I played chess in a tournament in Orlando, Florida, placing first, and received a provisional rating. But because most chess tournaments were held on Shabbos, I never played again competitively. Other than sports, I do not remember much of Dixie M. Hollins High School, except I took a lot of honors courses and a speed reading course and a creative writing course that served me to this very day. During my high school years, I held various jobs in the summer, including the usual, such as landscaping, but also the more exotic job of building fiberglass yachts at Helson Yacht and Morgan Yacht. Following my junior year in high school, I spent the summer in Israel with NCSY working on an agricultural kibbutz and served in a paramilitary version of the Boy Scouts. I always wanted to attend yeshiva after high school, but my family's modest means put the tuition out of reach. I was accepted at Florida State University with a full scholarship, but instead I accepted a partial scholarship and matriculated at the Georgia Institute of Technology, which is one of the finest engineering schools in the world. And I just recently found out, someone told me, one of my father's colleagues, that he was accepted to Georgia Institute because he had the top mathematics rankings in the state of Georgia. My major was aerospace engineering. However, I was not a successful student. I didn't have much money, so I spent a lot of time working as many as 3 jobs a day and night. This included working as a clerk in a hardware store, installing draperies, cleaning oven hoods at night after restaurants close, selling aluminum siding, and managing the campus billiards room. In addition, I had duties as a college work-study student, initially relegated to reading the stacks in the library to ensure the books were in proper order. Later, I obtained a more interesting position on a National Science Foundation grant, determining transmitter timing and developing overload protective circuitry as part of a joint project between Georgia Tech, the Inter-Union Commission on Solar Terrestrial Physics in Toronto, and the General Assembly of the International Union of Geodesy and Geophysics in Moscow. Also, during the first 2 years, along with a fellow classmate, I created a facility for Jewish students on campus called Chevrat HaNegev, Brotherhood of the South. We convinced the university to rent us an old house they owned, located at the edge of campus for a nominal sum. We resided there, used it as a meeting place for minyanim, and provided kosher meals on Shabbos for other Jewish students. My interests had changed back to all matters Yiddishkeit, so after sophomore year, I returned home to reconsider my future. My decision was to transfer to the Rabbinical College of America in New Jersey at the end of 1974. Still short of funds, I had several jobs sweeping floors in the yeshiva, driving the yeshiva van to Brooklyn monthly to pick up challah, and working in the kitchen. After 3 years, I took a year off and worked as a mashkiach, or supervisor, at a Chalav Yisrael farms. First for J&J Dairy in New Jersey, near the yeshiva, and then for Golden Flow Dairy in Lowville, New York. Returning to yeshiva after another year of studies, I took the exam for rabbinical certification in 1979. He notes that a biographical information pertaining to my yeshiva training may be found in my book, Making the Shabbos Kitchen in 2007, and is not repeated here. After graduation in 1979, a graduate from Hadar HaTorah in Brooklyn and I decided to obtain a master's degree in counselor education. We enrolled at the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida, for this purpose because it was a city close to our parents. During the day, we worked as volunteers for the local Chabad house, and we attended graduate school in the evenings. The first course I took was in quantitative methods, which I enjoyed very much. However, my favorite class was personality theory. For my master's thesis, I translated or paraphrased several Hasidic texts pertaining to Jewish mysticism and psychology, relating those texts to the notion of Jewish ethnic personality theory. My chavrusa had a change of plans when he got married midway through the first semester, so I was left to consider what to do next. I persevered and obtained the master's degree in 1981. My initial thought was to immediately pursue the PhD in counseling. My professor put a stop to that for reasons never revealed to me. He instituted a new policy requiring students to obtain several years of postmaster's counseling experience as a prerequisite to the doctoral program. I had no desire to interrupt my studies, so I was in quite a quandary of what to do next. Deep in thought, after hearing the new rules, while I was briskly walking away from the College of Education building, I accidentally ran into and knocked over Professor R. Clifford Blair. He had taught the quantitative methods course, which was the first class I had taken in the master's program. He was nearly blind with a macular degeneration condition that only permits minimal peripheral vision. Professor Blair apologized, naturally assuming he had run into me. I never disabused him of the mistake. Of course, it was I who was preoccupied, wasn't looking, and had run into him. He was able to recognize me by the sound of voice and general shape, and recalled that I was a student in his class the year prior. He could tell I was upset about something. When he inquired, I told him about the news of not being able to continue with a PhD in counseling without interrupting. Dr. Blair recalled that I had received perfect marks on all his tests and asked if I might be interested in pursuing the doctorate in applied statistics. I told him I didn't find the discipline to be very challenging. He was somehow aware I never had the book before me, nor had I taken notes in his class. I told him I had memorized his entire lecture down to the jokes he told. Naturally, he didn't believe me, so he asked me to recite some of the material from his lecture on the discovery of the chi-square distribution, which I did verbatim. After going on for about 5 minutes, he interrupted and asked me to repeat his lecture on the logic of the numerator in the ratio mean squared between over mean squared within in one-way analysis of variance, which I also recited verbatim. Then he asked a few other things, which I've trimmed for your benefit, which I also recited verbatim. Dr. Blair said he might have a solution for my problem. He would offer me a graduate teaching assistantship for 2 years, followed by another graduate research assistantship for 2 years, which would cover my tuition for the entire doctoral program if I would consider pursuing the PhD in measurement, evaluation, and research with a concentration in applied statistics, with him serving as my major professor. Some choose their careers via forethought and planning. By accepting his offer, I chose mine based on financial expediency. I received the PhD in 1985 and relied on repeating his lectures verbatim when I began as a professor, eventually augmenting them with my own observations over the next 33 years. As a side note, he published a conversation with R. Clifford Blair on the occasion of his retirement. For more information, my father notes that Dr. Clifford Blair was one of the leading scholars of the 20th century in modern statistical methods. His work based on Monte Carlo methods in non-parametric statistics changed the field of applied statistics, revolutionizing the landscape of received wisdom from the great and dead mathematicians from the 16th through 20th centuries. Dr. Blair passed away from ALS in 2019. He was very important to my father. They were very close. In addition to being a teaching and then research assistant, I also worked as a night counselor at a residential substance abuse facility from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and served as an occasional mashgiach for the OK laboratories at citrus plants, primarily having to travel to the Orlando area. After graduating, I stayed at USF as a visiting assistant professor and simultaneously served as the Chabad Shaliach of Pinellas County, Florida. I had been a volunteer until 1985, but from then until 1987, I served as an official Shaliach of Chabad, Pinellas County, St. Petersburg, Florida, Florida, while continuing as the assistant rabbi on a voluntary basis at Chabad House in Tampa, Florida. In 1987, I obtained a tenure-track position as an assistant professor at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. When I first arrived, I also took on additional jobs, such as being a night supervisor, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. at a bakery supply warehouse. And on Sundays, traveled to upstate Michigan to be the mashgiach for Chalav Yisrael milk produced by C.F. Berger Creamery. I also voluntarily served for a number of years at the Vad HaRabbanim of Greater Detroit as the attaché of the Rav Chazkel Gruber. Wayne State University is a Carnegie Research One doctoral extensive university of about 30,000 students. I soon rose through the ranks, obtaining tenure and being promoted to full professor. I primarily teach at the doctoral level. And now I'm going to read some statistical facts about Rabbi Professor Shlomo Stephen Sawilowsky. Going back to the early 12th century, my father is the fourth most prolific doctoral advisor with over 109 doctoral graduates. No one in history has served as the major professor in mathematics-related disciplines for more minority and female doctoral students than he. He has over 500 publications and presentations in peer-reviewed journals and many encyclopedia entries. He served as a statistical evaluator on competitive research grants totaling over $13 million in funding, including from the U.S. Department of Education, the National Science Foundation, U.S. Department of Commerce, Justice and Science, and many others. The studies were on topics such as anti-bullying for children with disabilities and their families, art-infused education, coaching for college students with ADHD, self-determination for at-risk students, and many more. And by securing this grant money, not only was he the evaluator, but someone else would be the principal investigator, and many other people had jobs thanks to him. My father's work has been cited over 6,000 times in peer-reviewed literature and over 1,000 times in doctoral dissertations around the world. He founded and edited the Journal of Modern Applied Statistical Methods with a mission to promote the development of modern analysis procedures for the social and behavioral sciences, such as education and psychology. Over the past decade, He published more peer-reviewed articles than any other journal in the United States from international and minority authors. In private consulting, my father provided litigation support as a statistician, psychometrician, and quantitative or qualitative methods expert in 36 lawsuits, many which took place in the US district courts. He defended the following governors during their governorship: Jennifer Granholm of Michigan, Brad Henry of Oklahoma, Deval Patrick of Massachusetts, and Lincoln D. Sheffy of Rhode Island. On the behalf of their state departments of social welfare or foster care services. He also represented the states of Missouri and Arizona. Basically, he saved taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars in what he would argue were frivolous lawsuits. He has too many awards to mention. I'll just name a few, a sample. I know we don't have all day. Some of these he received multiple times. Distinguished Paper Award of the American Educational Research Association. Wayne State University President's Award for Excellence in Teaching. Wayne State University College of Education's Award for Excellence in Teaching. Wayne State University Outstanding Graduate Mentor Award. Wayne State University Faculty Mentor Award. College of Education Faculty Scholarship Award. And he was named as a Wayne State University Distinguished Faculty Fellow. My father was nominated by Hyderabad University, India, University of Botswana, Africa, and Universidad de Federal de Pernambuco, Brazil, for the 2013 Nobel Peace Prize, along with Dr. Miodrag Lovric of Serbia and Professor Kaliampudi Rao from India for their work on the International Encyclopedia of Statistical Science. It was a collaboration of 619 top scholars across 105 different countries. We're almost done, but I'm sorry, there's still more. My father volunteered as an assistant or associate rabbi at 6 different shuls or minyanim, and he volunteered over 20,000 hours in adult Jewish education in metropolitan Detroit since 1987, including as the Magid Shiur through several rotations, the 5,422 pages of the Talmud in Daf Yomi at Congregation Beis Chabad of Farmington Hills, Michigan. He's given hundreds of shiurim over the past 35 years around the United States at universities, Chabad houses, social organizations, businesses, online, and others, on topics such as Hasidus, Talmud, the intersection of science and religion, and others. In 2004, he returned to Jerusalem for a 2-day exam, after which he received his smicha on Hilchos Shabbos from Rav David Ostroff, a student of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Rav David Chaim Stern, and Rav Moshe Halberstam. Subsequently, he published Making the Shabbos Kitchen in 2007 based on Rav Ostroff's shiurim. He created and edited the Journal of Pirkei Shoshanim Shema Yisrael Torah Network and served on the board of directors of Yeshivas Iyun Halacha since its inception. My father ends his autobiography by saying, "I have 2 children and 5 stepchildren. My daughter Sarah Lorenz and her husband Akiva have 3 children, Eitan Gavriel, Adira Peninit, and Adam Raphael. She is completing her psychological doctorate, and her husband received his PhD in applied statistics at Wayne State University. My son Jack received his PhD in applied statistics at Wayne State University, and we have had many lively discussions over the years on this topic. It is with much nachas I cite my son's work on the matter of the inflation of type 1 errors. Baruch Hashem, I am greatly blessed to have a loving family. The last thing I want to say is that we're all very proud of my father. He achieved more in just 66 years than most would in multiple lifetimes, and he will be loved and he will be missed by many people around the world. Thank you.
Rabbi Sawilowsky was truly a medaktek b'mitzvos, someone who was meticulous in his observance of Jewish law, which he knew cold. And it was also important to him that his funeral be conducted according to Chabad custom. And Chabad custom is not to deliver any eulogies at all. And indeed, since it is Rosh Chodesh, we are somewhat limited in our ability to do so. But there are exceptions, even within Jewish law, made to the law that you're not supposed to deliver eulogies on Rosh Chodesh, such as if the person is extraordinarily illustrious. Rabbi Sawilowsky falls into the halacha category, the category in Jewish law of a Gavra Rabbah, a truly significant and illustrious person. And his rabbi, his Chabad rabbi, Rabbi Bergstein, he told me that it's important that we should know who we are laying to rest this afternoon. Many of us here didn't know him particularly well. And the words that you heard from his children have really given us a picture of who Rabbi Sawilowsky was. But I'll leave with one statement from the Talmud, a statement that the sages said when Hillel HaZaken, Hillel the elder, passed away. They memorialized him as follows: Hey Chassid, hey Anav, Talmido Shel Ezra, someone who was righteous, was humble, a student of Ezra the scribe. You heard about what a chassid he was, a chassid in the colloquial sense, as a devoted follower and teacher of Chabad Chasidus. In everything he did, he was a walking Kiddush Hashem, sanctified God's name. I took the liberty of looking at the memorial wall that online that was posted just a day or two ago. And you could see how far and wide his influence spread. And what was remarkable about him was that he had so many disparate interests in his life, and there were aspects of his life that were so different, and you wouldn't know from one to the other that he was involved with them. If you just looked at him, you wouldn't know that he was a revered professor of educational statistics who was so prolific as you heard. But if you read his 150-page CV, you wouldn't know that it was referring to a modest Jew with a very impressive beard. None of these accolades interested him. He was the consummate Anav. What does humility mean in the literature of our sages? It doesn't mean that you negate your own accomplishments or you feel yourself unworthy. It means that you never feel that these are inherently a part of who you are, and that mean that you are deserving of praise for them. Now, Rav Shlomo was no shrinking violet. Barry Markman, who was on the committee that hired him in 1987, wrote that one of his tasks was to interview the faculty members from University of South Florida who recommended him for the position. And two of the referees said the same thing. They said how brilliant he was, but that you should never, ever get into an argument with him. And he asked why, and they said, because you will lose. And they were right. But I think that his humility allowed him to persevere in the face of considerable adversity and discrimination along his religious journey. He was accused of all sorts of things throughout his life, whether it was because people thought that he was perhaps, and it was in the 70s, he was People thought he was a drug addict because he was a returnee to Judaism. He was at one point accused of theft by the yeshiva he attended, and then he was able to prove his innocence. When he worked as a mashgiach of kashrus for the company Golden Flow, he was subject to a series of humiliating questions, which he turned right back on his questioners. I believe they asked him whether his mother went to the mikvah, and he said, "I don't know. Did your mother go to the mikvah?" And none of that turned him off. Any of us would have been subjected to the same questions, would have turned us off from religion permanently. But it wasn't about him. Nothing would deter him from his path in life because he was a person of purpose and a person of meaning, and it was never about him personally. And he was a student of Ezra. Ezra, the scribe, was the person who preserved Torah, the single person who kept Torah alive for the Jewish people. He was a Torah giant, Rav Shlomo, and a Torah personality. Rabbi Bergstein told me that if his path had taken him to the world of the Lithuanian yeshivas, he would be known now as one of the greatest Torah scholars in any yeshiva anywhere. And if he had been interested in self-promotion, then within the world of Chabad, he would have been considered a figure on par with Rav Adin Steinsaltz of blessed memory, who passed away a few months ago. He was always ready to impart Torah, and his knowledge was vast. Rabbi Bergstein told me that he would always be the last person, when you stay up all night on the night of Shavuot, the last slot is known, and pardon the title it's known as the graveyard shift. People are gone then. No one's paying attention. No matter what subject it is that you're talking about, nobody really is listening. But they always gave him that slot because he could make any subject riveting. People would be on the edge of their seats after having been up all night. And he cherished the relationships that he had with his rabbis, even though he knew as much as they did. People like Rav Shlomo come along all too rarely. And when we bid them farewell, we must learn their lessons and perpetuate their legacy. A humble, pious son of a student of Ezra, a loving father and stepfather and grandfather, and a light to his community and his people. May his soul be bound in the bonds of eternal life. We're now going to perform the final mitzvah that we can perform for a person who dedicated his life to helping others. And that is the mitzvah of kavura, the mitzvah of burial. After we close the grave, meaning after we put on the concrete lid over the grave, we're going to also bury some shemos, some sacred texts that have reached the end of their useful life. That is the Jewish law, that we don't treat them in a denigrating way, but rather we bury them and let them disintegrate that way. And for a person who was deeply dedicated to the study of Jewish text, it's most appropriate that he is accompanied on his final journey surrounding other texts as well. We show that we are reluctant to perform this mitzvah by taking the first shuffle and doing it backhanded, and for a variety of reasons. First of all, to show our reluctance, and second of all, because we are still in the midst of a global pandemic. We don't hand the shovel from one person to the next. At the conclusion of that, we will say the burial Kaddish. Since it is Rosh Chodesh, we don't say the usual Kel Malei Rachamim, the usual memorial prayer. call everybody to come forward. First the family, and then any friends. Ladies and gentlemen, I would not try and cut through here. It'd be much safer to go around. Got 4 shovels, everyone else.
we doing, Rabbi? Regular. And then we will do the line and away from the graveside. After that, anybody who wants to stay and finish, they should be welcome to do so, so that it's not.
I'm rolling this up, babe.
Yeah. What did you do with the plastic? And again,
Put it back in the bag.